You may well be aware of a TV program called Horrible Histories. It is a very successful, very popular, and award winning children's history show in which basically a group of actors dress up as historical characters and tell you gross bits from history. It's actually a great concept. My son really likes it, and unfortunately, it is intransigently anti British. Now, it wasn't originally when it started, but it's definitely become more so later on. It's based on a series of books by a particular children's author, and we're going to get into this in a minute because it turns out that these people just kind of hate Britain. They just kind of hate Britain, and they can't help but show this. I mean, you may well remember a few episodes that essentially went viral, such as one that was trashing Britain because of Brexit, they're like, ha, you think you're British? Well, it turns out everything from Britain is stolen. And it was insufferable because that's not what being British means. Saying, well, look, your tea comes from abroad. It's like, yes, but drinking tea is something that the British do. And so it's a part of our culture. Even it doesn't mean that we can only ever do anything and consume anything from the island. It means the culture is what we do, not where something has come from, right? But anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked. The point is, why would they do this? Why would they produce this? Well, they're trying to undermine national pride, national spirit, national solidarity, the esprit de corps that we possess as British people. They want us to feel like actually the country is not our own. What the attempt that underpins this is to dispossess us of our own heritage, our own particularity, to feel that we are a part of this place and that it belongs to us. That's what they're trying to do. That's all this is. And of course, this was hosted by Nish Kumar, who I'm sure claims to be British and not from somewhere else. But anyway, as I say, Brexit Britain had failed to historically produce anything of note, instead relying on imports. It's like, well, that's obviously not true. Like, there are so many things that were invented in Britain that came from here and nowhere else. But it doesn't matter because that's not what the point is. The point is just to literally say, this is what we are. Yeah, okay, some things we have adopted from abroad, some things we have not, and that doesn't matter. What matters is these are expressions of how we think a good life is led. I mean, we'll go on. Like, for example, there was another episode where the writers of Horrible History decided, no, everyone in Britain has always been black until, for some reason, 8,000 years ago, they decided to all become white. And so black people own Britain more than the British people do, is what the underlying message of this is, right? Black history is somehow more legitimate, right? So black people don't come from overseas. The Africans are more entitled to Britain than the British people are. And this is the inverse worldview that Horrible Histories is presenting to children, using the BBC license fee to propagandize. And again, it's, they say, we want to reevaluate what we think about the past. It's like, well, why would we want to do that, actually? Like, what's the impetus behind that? What's the point? What's the motive? There's no reason to do this, right? The reason to do this would be to essentially deprive the British people of their heritage and provide a new heritage to people who are not originally British. And I mean, why say this? Like, early Britons were black before these Tsars were British. We don't know that. That's not a proven fact. It's a hypothesis that it could have been something like 8,000 years ago, the genes for white skin evolved in Europe, right? But even if that's true, they're not black, right? Because when we say black, that means African. What they were is they undoubtedly would have had like darker skin than we have now, but that again doesn't matter because you've got the abstract category of black and white, which could encompass anything, right? So you've got like black people in India and like the Amerindian Islands, who are not related directly to Africans. They just have black skin. And yet they're bunched in with sub-Saharan Africans who also have black skin. And now we're lumping them in with the people who had darker skin in northwestern Europe before white skin evolved, as if there's some connection between these people, and there's just not. The color of their skin does not connect them. But let's assume that the Ice Age people who came to Britain after the receding of the ice sheet did have dark skin. So what? They are still our lineal ancestors. They still have a direct connection from us to them, and we know this because, of course, we found a body of someone from 8,000 years ago in Cheddar Gorge, and they did some local DNA testing and found that his direct descendant lives a couple of miles away. We know that we are the lineal descendants of the people who came here in the Ice Age. People from Africa or anywhere else have no claim to this. And yet Horrible Histories has tried to say, no, British people have got no legitimacy, no claim to Britain, no heritage here, there's nothing, this country, this land does not belong to them. But Africans and other foreigners with dark skin, they have a claim to this. They were here first. And it's like, well, if they were here first, why aren't they the lineal descendants of Cheddar Man? Why is it they have no descent, literally no ancestral connection to this, whereas we literally do, and we can scientifically and objectively prove that? Right? That's the total problem with speaking in these abstract, categorical ways. Like, it doesn't mean anything to say someone is black or white when you're talking about heritage, because we have the heritage of people that you are claiming are black, and these other people don't. So why bring them up? Why are you doing this? And the answer is, of course, communist subversion. This is why The Guardian loves Horrible History. And look at the way they characterize it. Silly, subversive, and scatological. Well, hang on a second. I don't want my children to be subverted. I don't want a bunch of woke prats from London subverting my children. I don't think that a license fee, like, again, something you have to pay if you want to watch TV in this country, should be funding subversion of the British state and people. Why is the BBC paying to subvert its own people? Why are they doing this? And the answer is, of course, communism. It always just comes down to they are basically insane communists who hate themselves, hate their own country, and feel that actually other people are more deserving than they are. And this is a tradition with a long pedigree in Britain. You can go back to Orwell pointing out that, well, the average liberal in this country would feel more embarrassed about singing the national anthem than stealing from the church poor box. And my God, is it true? It's as true as it's ever been. It's exactly true now. And they have all of the ideological reasoning to make it the case. Right? And so it's not a surprise that the author of Horrible Histories is Terry Deary, the children's author whose books and writings that the Horrible History series is based on. He loathes the British Empire with a passion. Of course he does. Of course he loathes the British Empire with a passion. Why wouldn't he? Why would he write subversive anti-British propaganda for children to make them feel that they don't possess this country, to make them feel that actually other people have a more legitimate claim, and in fact to make them feel that they are the colonists in the ancestral lands that the British people have occupied for 10,000 contiguous years? Why wouldn't he hate the British Empire? Of course he does. Of course he does. There's just no argument being made. There's just no argument being made that can justify trying to deprive our children of their patrimony. That's not acceptable. It is in no way acceptable to make British children feel that this isn't really their ancestral home, because it is their ancestral home. The scientific facts prove it. The way we describe ourselves denotes it, and we have nothing we need to justify to anyone. And so, I mean, lots of people are pointing out, well, hang on a second, this seems to be just generally anti-British propaganda. Why are we paying for this? And in response to this, you get the kind of insufferable, I'd rather be stealing from the church poor box mentality coming from the producer, Richard Bradley here. This I just found insufferable. So obviously he went to Cambridge, right? Obviously he is at the very top of British society, which means he has to hate British society. He's not allowed to like it. It's just intrinsically embedded in him to be like, well, yes, I mean, I have to go around pointing out to everyone how bad it is and how we don't really have a claim to this place and how actually we're bad. I mean, we may have done lots of good things, but that doesn't matter. And so he says, well, look, we're innately anti-authoritarian. It's like, oh, right, is Britain an authoritarian country, is it? Like, is that what Britain is? We like that we can be rebellious and rude and scatological. Okay, but what you're saying there is we were given an appropriate amount of freedom and we decided to abuse it. We decided to try and undermine Britain and people and children's feelings towards their own country. Like, that's an argument for you not having that freedom, right? You're not using it responsibly. And so, anyway, they carry on the debate on how British horrible histories has been in the recent years has given rise to criticism from right-wing media because, yeah, you're being subversive left-wing communists. And he says, well, look, I mean, you know, I think it's so tremendously British to try and undermine Britain and the British state. I mean, he literally says, my argument is that horrible histories is probably the most British of things. Ah, yes, the most British of things in the most negative way. Again, Orwell's point that you can't bring yourself to sing the national anthem, but you can steal from the church poor box. I mean, metaphorically, that's exactly what you're doing, right? You're stealing the inheritance of our children so you can feel like you're a good person for some reason. That makes you scum, as far as I'm concerned. That makes you a bad person. And he's like, I also think the song, which was about the legacy of colonialism, where we got our tea and coffee and sugar from, was not contentious at all. Well, to you, of course it's not. To you, someone who grew up with the background of a decent and patriotic country that didn't hate itself back when you were young, can say, well, look, I've inherited this thing, and so now I'm going to take a very critical lens to Britain and its history. I'm going to make sure that children in the future don't have that background that I naturally assume. The presuppositions that inform me and situate me in the world, I'm going to deprive those from future generations. So hang on a second, that's an evil and selfish thing. You absolute boomer. This is a terrible, terrible thing to do. And you don't even realize why you're doing it. You don't even think about why you're doing it. And you think, okay, well, you know, we've got to stick it to the right. No one's got a corner on that definition of what makes us British. Well, that is one of the negative characteristics of the British. That is absolutely, you're embodying them completely. Anyway, this really annoys me. And what annoys me so much about it is that I essentially can't, I don't want to stop my children from watching it, right? Because they really enjoy it and it's nice that they have an interest in history. I guess what I'm going to have to do is try and find something written by someone who is not an anti-British communist, and hopefully they'll start to enjoy that instead.